welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 on Channels Television, coming to you live from Lagos. And a reminder of our top stories. After months of legal battle, Presidential Election Petitions Tribunal judges unanimously affirm President Muhammadu Buhari as Nigeria's duly elected president in the February the 23rd presidential election. People's Democratic Party presidential candidate Atiku Abubakar rejects Presidential Election Tribunal judgment, seeks redress at the Supreme Court. Federal government evacuates about 187 Nigerians who voluntarily chose to leave South Africa following latest spate of attacks in the former apartheid country. And Bahamas Emergency Services lists 2,500 people missing after Hurricane Dorian landing on the island, with fears death toll may rise. Now, for more information on our top stories and others, do visit our website, channelstv.com. youtube.com/channelsweb has videos of all our shows. Now, to discuss today's judgment, which was keenly anticipated, we're now being joined live from Abuja by a senior advocate of Nigeria and a professor of law, Professor Tahir Maman. Thanks a lot for joining us on the News at 10. And what a day.
Thank you, Gemma,
I would say, Prof. Thank you. Over 8 hours. But then in the end, we had that unanimous judgment. What are your thoughts about the decision of the panel?
Well, thank you very much for having me. The starting point actually is to commend the distinguished members of the panel for having discharged their responsibility and concluded the assignment within time, because some could have just allowed, as it happened in the past, for it to run its course and then not complete, and then on technical grounds the matter is comes to end. But we had these distinguished members, going through this for the last 3 months, extremely difficult exercise, and with high expectations in the country and from the politicians. And today we have a judgment which is very comprehensive and very well supported with authorities for both sides, for the two parties, and the rest of the country actually to consider. And then secondly, the judgment actually brings to the fore the nature of election petitions and the difficulties petitioners can have when they file petitions arising from elections to challenge elections.
That was going to be my next
presumption.
Yes, that was actually what I was going to ask you next, because even as the judgment was being read out, you saw the justices there saying they failed to prove their case beyond reasonable doubt. I mean, what does that do for others who would want to come before the panel?
Well, the key point is that we need to preserve our elections and introduce some sanity in it. And remember, presidential election is not a local government election where you have small number of people and you simply, the logistics are minimal. We are talking about the entire country and the entire resources that we needed to run an election. So, and we need some stability in our democratic process. So that is why the law makes provision for regularity when the electoral body takes a decision on an election which is concluded. So for any person who wants to challenge it, then it's a serious matter. There has to be sufficient evidence to be able to upturn that decision of the official body. So that is the nature of it. And in any case, actually, even in the general principles of litigation, even in basic civil matters, he who alleges must prove. So it's a very basic principle of law. And
yes, when you
so it doesn't actually move away from the general.
Sorry about that, Prof. I mean, just to look at the fallout of the judgment today, the PDP have talked about the fact that they'll be heading to the Supreme Court. Do you see the same outcome quickly now, or do you think something different will transpire?
Well, we are in the process of predicting the outcome of the thinking of justices when it goes to them. But if you look at the nature of the case and the evidence and where the tribunal treated it, it becomes a bit difficult for it to be obtained, even at the appellate level, because it clearly brought out the interplay between the law, the Electoral Act, and then the substantive provision of the Electoral Act, and then evidence, nature of evidence, because the Act provides for the rights, duties, and obligations of the parties involved. But every piece of evidence has to go through, information has to go through the evidence, has to be sifted through the evidence, which is guided by the Evidence Act. And that's why everything about the witnesses, makers of documents, and the centrality of officials at the polling unit, because they are the ones who are directly witnesses to elections. Any other party is more or less a third party, and therefore whatever evidence they bring in will amount to some sort of hearsay. And so this is really where the problem is, where anybody going on appeal will have to grapple with all those challenges.
Well,
and then the same thing with the server, with the evidence emanating from the server and the existence of the server. These are all matters which are governed by tested principles of evidence. And for somebody to go past, these basic principles of evidence have to be met. So this is where those going on appeal will have an uphill task. And remember, the judgment is it's a unanimous judgment of the 5 justices. And usually when you have this kind of decision, the courts, it tends to weigh very heavily on the mind of the courts, even though it's a next level in terms of hierarchy. But
all right, Senior Advocate of Nigeria and Professor of Law, Professor Tahir Maman. No apologies there. I did think you were finished. Professor Tahir, thank you for joining us on the News at 10 tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
We move on to another burning issue today, and about 187 Nigerians evacuated from South Africa have arrived at the Murtala Mohammed International Airport in Lagos. The plane conveying them touched ground about 9:35 p.m. They left the Otambo International Airport in Johannesburg, South Africa this evening after an 8-hour delay. Our correspondent Bukola Jo Oketumbe gives us an update from the airport.
It's been a long day at the airport as the flight earlier scheduled to arrive at 6 p.m. touched down at exactly 9:35 p.m. Officials of the Diaspora Commission, immigration officials, and of course those from the National Emergency Management Agency were on hand to receive the returnees. We were told by authorities that about 107 people arrived on board the aircraft. And as they disembarked, we saw some holding placards reading "Say No to Xenophobia." Earlier, the authorities told us that the Bank of Industry will make a little amount of money available to those who have returned home.
The Nigerian police must stop killing Nigerians. The army must stop killing Nigerians, because South African police, South Africans, they respect their people. And throughout xenophobia in South Africa.
Meanwhile, before the returnees left South Africa, some others who were willing to leave voluntarily were turned back over inadequate documentation for traveling with children, while about 7 others were briefly detained for allegedly entering the country illegally. They were eventually allowed to board the flight. Our South Africa Bureau Chief Betty Dibia reports.
You will never see shame.
They were first sent off with a prayer by the Consul General, Godwin Adama, and the process soon began. As early as 4 a.m. local time, the evacuees were already gathered outside Nigeria's missions in the country, here in Johannesburg at the Consulate General and Pretoria, Nigeria's High Commission. First, the roll call was taken and they all proceeded into the coaches here provided by the missions for the journey to the airport.
Wow. Kelvin James.
Kelvin Gates.
Jonas Oluwabumi. Jonas Oluwabumi.
Jonas Oluwabumi.
Bring out your passport and don't delay us.
Save for a few documentation issues, and the ones who defy the two-piece 32 kg luggage specification all seem smooth sailing.
The evacuation has been going very well, and we are satisfied with the response of Nigerians, those who are willing to go.
One after the other, the coaches left for the airport. Some of those left behind didn't take the goodbye too well. Lorraine, a psychologist, is a South African. Her partner of a few years left with this first batch. She didn't want to be identified.
It is a very sad day here today because lots of people don't understand the lives of some of the South African women who got married to these Nigerians. They got good homes, they got good families, they've provided for. And most of the South African women are struggling out there. This is the sad thing of the event of what happened here.
The Air Peace flight MEN 2759 landed on time in South Africa, but the processing of passengers took much more time than expected. From those whose record of entry into the Republic could not be found, to those who didn't have the required documents to travel with children. Some issues were resolved, while some passengers were turned back. But those who made it on the flight were glad.
To my shop on Monday. Before I reached there, nothing. Everything was bought in Julie's by Marvel. Nothing there. I can't take pain inside my shop. So I'm happy to go.
At the boarding gate, they showed some Nigerian spirit.
Free us! Not a match. We are going! We are going!
A second flight is expected to take the next batch of evacuees home. From Johannesburg, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Very sad tale indeed. When the news at 10 returns, Bahamas Emergency Services lists 2,500 people missing, and Hurricane Dorian landing on the island with fierce death toll may rise. That's on the national scene with Around the World in 5. Do join us again.